Today we're going to look at this question. Imagine that you did this reaction but started with 2.10 grams of salicylic acid and 5.2 milliliters of acetic anhydride. The Weibo and filter paper have a mass of 1.75 grams, and the mass of the Weibo plus your dry white solid product is 3.78 grams. Okay, so one thing we need to notice is this is a 1-to-1 reaction. So for every 1 mole of salicylic acid, you're going to use 1 mole of acetic anhydride. You're going to produce 1 mole of acetylsalicylic acid and 1 mole of acetic acid. That's tough to say. Okay, so basically this is the reaction to make aspirin. And the first question asks, if the mass of dried aspirin plus filter paper plus Weibo is 3.78 grams, what is the actual yield of aspirin? If we look back at the original question stem, we notice that they give us the mass of the Weibo and filter paper. All we have to do is take our 3.78 grams and subtract 1.75 grams from it, and that's going to give us 2.03 grams. So that's how much actual aspirin we created in this reaction. Now, second part, assuming that all the salicylic acid underwent reaction, what is the theoretical yield of aspirin? So what we need to do is we can look here and say, okay, all of this salicylic acid reacted, and we don't need to know which one's a limiting reagent because we're assuming that all the salicylic acid went under reaction. That means we used all that we could. So now all we have to do is convert our salicylic acid to our aspirin. So grams of salicylic acid to grams of acetylsalicylic acid. So let's set that up. That is a dimensional analysis question. So 2.10 grams of salicylic acid. I'm just going to abbreviate it for space. And we need to get the grams of salicylic acid into moles of salicylic acid. So for every 1 mole of salicylic acid, we get 138.121 grams. Okay, so now we're in moles of salicylic acid. We need to get from moles of salicylic acid to moles of acetylsalicylic acid. So for every 1 mole of salicylic acid, we get 1 mole of acetylsalicylic acid, or just aspirin. Okay, now we need to get from moles of aspirin to grams of aspirin. I'm going to move down here for the sake of space. So for every 1 mole of aspirin, we get 180.158 grams of aspirin. Okay, so now we can go through and cancel our units. So grams of salicylic acid, moles of salicylic acid, and moles of aspirin. And now we're going to multiply across the numerator and the denominator. So 2.10 times 180.158. We're going to keep the grams divided by 138.121, and that is going to give us 2.74 grams of aspirin. Alright, so that's the second part. That is the theoretical yield for aspirin in this reaction. This is to say that if everything went perfect and we got everything we possibly could out of our reaction, this would be the actual yield. So last part, determine the reaction's percent yield using the actual yield. All right, so the percent yield of a reaction is equal to the actual yield divided by the theoretical yield. And then you multiply that by 100, and that will give you your percent yield. So what we actually got out of our reaction was 2.03 grams. The theoretical yield was 2.74 grams. Multiply that by 100, and what you get is 75.9% yield. Okay, that's how you do those questions. If you have any other questions, email me. Thank you for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next video.